Happy Friday morning and welcome into the Moss Art Center in Blacksburg on this week's edition of 3304 First Pitch. I'm Giovanni Heater, joined alongside our excellent panelists today, Mr. Carter Hill, Mr. Raza Umerani. Fellas, thanks so much for joining us. Diamond sports are in the full swing of things here.
I'm fired up. I know you're fired up. I mean, baseball's here, softball's here as well. Yes, basketball is still dwindling down, but anytime spring sports arrives, I'm always ready to go.
You know, Carter, I'm not sure what I'm more fired up about, baseball and softball being back or being up here at this desk with you two guys. It's a pleasure to be here on this Friday morning. Can't wait to talk some Diamond sports with you guys.
All right, let's go ahead and bring everybody up to speed a little bit here. Virginia Tech baseball, they sit at 2-2 on the year. They won the series down in Charlotte one Friday and Saturday. They lost on Sunday on that getaway game, and then they just fell to JMU on the road on Wednesday evening as well. So 2-2 for Hokies baseball, John Sheff and company. On the other side, Pete D'Amour's squad, Virginia Tech softball, they're 8-1. 5-game weekend coming up this weekend in Athens, Georgia. So that's something definitely to keep an eye out for, but a really good start for both teams here.
Yeah, you can't really ask for anything more if you're Virginia Tech, especially on the baseball side. Listen, you might think, oh, you want to sweep Charlotte, but 2 out of 3 wins, especially winning those first 2 games on the road. Charlotte is no slouch, by the way. That's a team that won Conference USA last year, transitioned into the American Athletic Conference this year, and they're picked to finish second. They're a projected preseason number 3 seed in the NCAA tournament by D1 Baseball. No slouch at all. They should be very pleased with taking 2 out of 3 there. And then JMU, yeah, you'd like to win that game, but it's a feisty midweek team. They just beat number 2 Arkansas on the road last weekend. So I think 2-2 is very, very acceptable if you're the baseball team right now.
You talked about the American rise, and I think people forget in college baseball, it's almost like there's a Power 6. I mean,
Yes.
The American is right up there,
Absolutely.
one of the best conferences in the country. And then on the softball side of things, we talk about it all the time. Pete D'Amour's group always challenges itself early on in the season. An 8-2-1 start is pretty dang good. You get on to Auburn, you win a game over the Tigers, you tie the one in dramatic fashion, I guess, if you will, and then you mentioned it. You go to Athens, Georgia this weekend to face off against the top 5 Georgia Bulldogs team that eliminated you last year in the NCAA tournament.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the highlights. Once again, Virginia Tech baseball coming off the heels of an absolute thriller in Harrisonburg. It's the Dukes and the Hokies out in Harrisonburg, an in-state clash, Virginia Tech and JMU. Chris Cannizzaro would get it going with Virginia Tech. He is able to crank this double out into left field, guys.
How about Chris Cannizzaro right down the left field line? So solid in this Virginia Tech lineup. The transfer from Bucknell, a solid return for Virginia Tech.
He's 7 for 11 in his last 3 games.
All right, the defense would show up for Virginia Tech as well. Clay Grady ends up making an incredible sliding stop down the left field line. How about this play by the freshman shortstop?
Yeah, you know, I said he slid on his knees like he scored a soccer goal. Clay Grady, one of the anchors of those 4 returning members of the Virginia Tech infield, and that is a SportsCenter top 10 play for sure.
More defense out of Virginia Tech. It's Sam Tackett out in right field. He's able to track this one down. How about this throw? Cannon of an arm play at the plate.
That is a rope there from Sam Tackett in right. John Sheff raved about him in the preseason, about his offense defensively taking over there.
Eddie Micheletti, the designated hitter, smashes this one out of the park. Such high hopes for the George Washington transfer.
Absolutely. Micheletti's been playing DH the whole season thus far for baseball, and he's been really good. That's the first of, I think, many home runs we'll see from him.
Another bomb out of the Hokies. Goodbye, Carson DiMartini.
Yeah, break out the air hammer, and of course it starts with Carson DiMartini. First of the year for Virginia Tech, and first of the year for Carson DiMartini, I should say. Hokies within 1.
Here's Clay Grady once again. RBI single. This ties the ball game. Virginia Tech was down by 5 runs, and they complete the comeback.
Yeah, you said it, Gio. They were down 6-1 and just kept clawing back. Top of the 8th, no outs, finally able to put a rally together.
DiMartini does his job, sacrifice fly out into left center field. It brings in a run, and Virginia Tech, their first lead here since the beginning of the game.
All the way back, and of course, again, Carson DiMartini just getting the job done. Hokies take the 1-run lead.
Then JMU, Coleman Cabrice, he walks it off, base hit out into right. Bases were loaded in the bottom of the 9th with nobody out. Tough situation. JMU steals it in Harrisonburg after Virginia Tech falls short on the comeback. Nevertheless, Virginia Tech off to a 2-2 start in 2024. Raza, we'll turn it over to you. How did this one get away from the Hokies?
Well, I think it starts at the beginning when you talk about the way that they started with Madden Clement on the mound. Listen, true freshman, first start midweek. It's a tough spot if you're, a 19-year-old kid. They have really high hopes for the Butler, Pennsylvania native, but he wasn't able to put together a good performance. He only retired 4 batters, only pitched 1 2/3 innings. But Tech's still able to claw their way back in the game. In my opinion, what went wrong is after the Hokies go up 7-6, they give up a run in the bottom of the 8th to make it 7-7. Then they go down in order in the top of the 9th, right? You want to give your closer or any of your bullpen arms some help going into the bottom of the 9th. If you go down 1, 2, 3, that's not giving them much help. And then when you get into the bottom of the 9th, James Madison's able to load the bases without Tech recording an out.
Yeah.
And they go just bang, 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 and Coleman Calabrese, as you mentioned, it walks it off with that RBI single.
Carter, a slow start for Virginia Tech offensively, but the bats woke up. And then we've seen the bats all season long. 10 runs in back-to-back games down in Charlotte on Friday and Saturday. You see another offensive outpouring here out of the Hokies against JMU. So what is it about these bats? And it just seems like there's a lot of evidence these guys can hit.
I mean, it's certainly the backbone of this team. I mean, it goes back to the hammer for Virginia Tech. I mean, the offensive identity has been there for the Hokies really for the past 3 years under John Sheff. I mean, you mentioned it, Raza. You're returning your entire infield. And that's not just defensively. I mean, all 4 of those guys can rake at the plate.
Absolutely.
With DeMartini, Clay Grady, Christian Martin, and then Garrett Michelle, of course, down at first. Couple question marks still in the outfield, but again, Sam Tackett's somebody who was just talked about endlessly before the season started. Ben Watson hit above 450 at the Division III level. Your starting center fielder, and then Chris Canizero returns as well. All across the board, this Virginia Tech team should be very solid offensively for sure.
All right, well, 12-game home stretch coming up for Virginia Tech baseball at English Field, and the Hokies may have just found their ace on the hill. For more on the true freshman in the upcoming competition, our own Wesley Clarke has more.
Thank you, Giovanni. Spring is finally here, and there's nothing better than the sounds of baseball. Virginia Tech started their season on the diamond in Charlotte last weekend with 20 runs in the first 2 games, winning both. The scoring was led by none other than Carson DeMartini, who was ranked 42nd in D1 Baseball's top 100 prospects going into the season. But that wasn't the storyline of the game. It was all about pitcher from Northern Virginia, Brett Renfroe, who was the first true freshman to start a game since the Hokies joined the ACC. Well, if you check the stat sheet, it is safe to say that he did more than you could have asked for. Renfroe gave up 1 hit and struck out 7 with his mid-90s fastball in 5 innings of work. The Hokies ended up dropping the next 2 games, one of them a disappointing midweek loss to James Madison back up in Harrisonburg. But lots of positives coming out of John Sheff's team, and he has no problem recruiting hitters who can rank, as Virginia Tech strung up 36 hits and 32 runs in the first 4 games. Now the Hokies look ahead to a crucial 12-game homestand to start the season against Rhode Island, Radford, Stony Brook, Binghamton, and then finally ACC play when they host the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Baseball, however, is a long season. With a disappointing 2023, Blacksburg still has high expectations for this Virginia Tech team, as they were 2 years removed from 1 win away from a trip to the College World Series. Tristan Martin and Chris Canizero, who already have 7 runs batted into his name, are also names to look out for during the 2024 campaign, as they will lead 17 upperclassmen on this Hokie squad and try to put them back on track. The road to Omaha starts right now. Back to you, Gio.
Good stuff as always. Appreciate you, Wesley. All right, guys, let's go ahead and keep the conversation there and talk about this true freshman pitcher, Brett Renfroe, on the hill for Virginia Tech. He's your Friday probable starter in his debut. 5 scoreless innings, 2 base runners, 7 strikeouts against Charlotte last Friday. Maybe some shades of Drew Hackenberg here in his freshman campaign, Carter?
I think John Sheff would hope so. That's probably something you want to see. I mean, Drew Hackenberg ended up being a 2nd-round pick by the Atlanta Braves. That's a tough expectation on a true freshman, but I know, Raza, you are all over this. First true freshman in Virginia Tech baseball history to start on opening day? I mean, that's insane. And not only that, he shoved for Virginia Tech.
Yes,
absolutely shoved.
I think Brett Renfroe would tell you himself that, I mean, you know, even if those lofty expectations are on him, he was unfazed by it. I talked to him after that opening day start on Friday down in the Queen City. He said, nerves are common. You just got to use them to your advantage, and that he did. And listen, you are right. A comparison to 2022 Drew Hackenberg is lofty.
Yeah.
And Carson DeMartini said that himself when I talked to him. But that's a very fair, you know, comparison if you're Brett Renfroe, excuse me. He's been excellent. I think he will be the Friday probable starter moving forward this season for Virginia Tech. And if he can keep this up, Tech will be much, much better off for it, because starting pitching between injuries and, you know, issues, they were really, really up and down over the course of 2023. If Brett Renfroe can emerge as the ace of this staff, man, Virginia Tech's in a good spot.
All right, well, Brett Renfro's a newcomer, but there's a lot of newcomers across the board, but especially on this pitching staff. It starts with your Saturday probable in Wyatt Parliament, who went last week as well against Charlotte. He is a Rutgers transfer for Virginia Tech. How about some of the newcomers on this pitching staff, Raza?
Yeah, I think Parliament is a big one that you mentioned because I think he brings the most Power 5 experience. I think that's why he got that start on Saturday. There was a lot of question marks up in the air. Who could get their start? Is it Jeremy Neff? Is it Grant Manning? You bring in a ton of guys, and not just from the Power 5 or from Division I. You've got Division II and Division III arms in this staff now. I think Parliament will be the anchor of that group. But like I said, Neff is a guy who brings a ton of experience. Manning is a guy who brings a ton of experience. And also, like I mentioned earlier with Clement, there's a lot of young arms in this staff as well. You got Jacob Exum. You got even an experienced guy like Matt Silverling, who's been huge down the stretch for Virginia Tech, pitching some high leverage innings. So I think there's a blend of new guys and old guys. Well, more experienced guys, maybe not older guys.
More experience.
So, but I think, when it comes down to it, Gio, health is the biggest concern with this group. Because as I mentioned, 2023 was plagued by injuries, not just in the pitching staff, but also offensively for Virginia Tech. But pitching is really what did them, or undid them rather, last year. If they can stay healthy, no matter who is pitching, I think Virginia Tech's in a good spot.
Yeah, as we already know, Griffin Green sidelined with a Tommy John surgery for the entirety of this season. That was one of the many injuries, not only to the pitching staff, but to the whole team a year ago. I want to talk about the other side of the battery here, guys, behind the plate. You got three very solid options at catcher, right? You got Henry Cook. He's your guy that has a cannon of an arm behind the plate and a great bat as well. You got Garrett Giebel, right? He's your steady Eddie. Guys love to throw to him. He makes everything look like a strike. But then you got the true freshman as well in the mix in David McCann. He might be the best bat out of the three. We've seen him come in and pinch hit a little bit, but Giebel and Cook have already teed off for homers in 2024. I mean, you really have an embarrassment of riches behind the dish, Carter.
Which is a great sign for Virginia Tech because I think, and I get it if you're John Sheff, I should say, and company, why you don't want to talk about this. Brody Donay hits the portal.
Yeah.
He's not Florida, and he's a potential maybe in the future first, second-round draft pick with his bat. Not great defensively, but, man, that guy can rake. But Henry Cook.
6'7".
Yes, 6'7". I mean, the frame is unreal. Henry Cook comes on. Hadn't played a lot the last few years for Virginia Tech. Started 3 for 3 the other day at JMU. You mentioned he went yard the other day as well. And then Garrett Giebel has kind of been your steady option. He's seen legit playing time for Virginia Tech the last 3 years. And you mentioned, I talked to both of y'all. You did the games down in Charlotte last week. You covered it for Tech Sideline. Garrett Giebel, the guys love throwing to him because he can frame up pitches so well. And obviously, if you can have your pitchers that are locked in with that and locked in with your battery mate, I think the guys are going to enjoy throwing to somebody like a Garrett Giebel. So a lot of good options for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, you mentioned Brody Donay. That's a big loss on the offensive side, but Henry Cook and Garrett Giebel have made amends for that. They are the team's top 2 leaders in OPS.
Yeah.
That's not nothing with a lineup featuring guys like Chris Cannizzaro, Carson DiMartini, Ben Watson, Eddie Micheletti. I mean, these guys have not just been hitting for power. They both obviously have home runs from the series down in Charlotte, but they've just been making good contact with the ball. I think Henry Cook has been outstanding. I think maybe he's the better bat of the two. I think it's interesting you mentioned David McCann because he's the freshman in the group, and like you said, maybe the best bat. As it currently stands, which is really saying something as a freshman, he'll probably emerge down the stretch. You're right, he's only really getting pinch hitting opportunities now, but I think regardless, Tech should feel excellent about the situation they have behind the dish.
You know, you're kind of our baseball expert. I'll ask both of you guys, but I want to go to you first. Who do you think is your Friday, Saturday starter behind the dish, or your main guy for Virginia Tech right now?
I do think it depends on the battery, like you said. Obviously, down in Charlotte, it was Cook in Game 1, Giebel in Game 2. I think that is what you should see if you're Virginia Tech here coming up, because who knows, maybe Renfro feels comfortable pitching to Giebel and Parliament to Cook or vice versa. So I do think it depends on the battery, but I do think regardless of who it ends up being, in this upcoming series against Rhode Island, Tech should be fine defensively and offensively because both of those guys have played pretty good defense behind the dish as well.
It's a good problem to have if you're Virginia Tech. A very good problem to have if you're the Hokies.
Yeah, Giebel ended up starting on Sunday, so that was his second start of the series. But Cook then came in as they kind of looked for a spark. They were down to the 49ers, ended up losing that ball game. Well, you had mentioned Micheletti. You had mentioned Ben Watson. Want to ask you guys what can be expected out of those two newcomers inside the batting order because John Sheff, again, adds some nice bats out of the portal.
Yeah, Ben Watson, you mentioned it earlier, Carter. 486 he hit last year in Division III with Elizabethtown. 486 is a number that's impossible to comprehend. And the year before, he set a record with Morehead City hitting 427 in the Coastal Plain League. That's a record that hasn't been topped yet either. So you're talking about a guy that's C-ball, hit ball. Now, granted, he hasn't had, I think, the start to the year he's wanted because it's a tough transition. You're jumping all the way from Division III to Division I at the Power 5 level, hitting just 154 to start the year. But this is a bat that is just too solid to not wake up yet. Eddie Micheletti, on the other hand, has been fantastic. He's hitting 250. He had the home run like we talked about earlier at James Madison. I think these guys are both going to start to steadily improve. And you talked about Sam Tackett. This is a guy that Tech has been raving about, especially John Sheff. He had a great fall. He's had a great spring, and I think he's going to have a good season for Virginia Tech as well. So I think it might be a bit of a slow start compared to some of the other, more experienced guys in the lineup like your Clay Grady's or Carson DeMartinis. But Tech is going to have maybe an embarrassment of riches in its lineup as well.
And not to hammer the same points home, you talked about 486, but the number that really stands out to me is 427. Because the Coastal Plain League, arguably, is probably the third best league in summer collegiate baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, you're facing some legit arms in that league. So to hit 427 with the wood bat, I can understand why Virginia Tech was attracted to him.
It's almost as if you were a broadcaster this past summer in the Coastal Plains League. Also, another tidbit for you. Eddie Micheletti, he led the A-10 in hits last season. So, I mean, the George Washington transfer is sensational. Virginia Tech and Rhode Island is coming up all weekend long from English Field. For Friday, it's a 4 p.m. first pitch, 2 p.m. on Saturday, and then 1 p.m. on Sunday. Guys, let's go ahead, flip the script here, talk a little bit of Hokies softball. Virginia Tech coming off the heels of a midweek win over Elon at Tech Softball Park. And here we go. The Phoenix and the Hokies from Tech Softball Park. Virginia Tech would get it going early. Corey McMillan, a triple, and she is able to hit this one right down the line. Perfect placement there.
Just snuck in there. The transfer from Radford, first base hit as a Hokie at home. And how about that, a stand-up triple?
More out of Virginia Tech offensively. How about this? An RBI double, and it scores the runner all the way from first for Addie Green.
Yeah, Drew Menser, what an effort, diving out, couldn't make the play, I should say. It goes to the wall, Lila Blackwell, the pinch runner scores, RBI double for Green, Hokies lead 2-0.
More doubles, Cameron Fagan. She smashes this one to the wall out in right center. Both her and Addie Green lead the ACC in doubles.
Cameron Fagan always going to be one of the more consistent bats in Tech's lineup.
And then this one, out of here, Corey McMillan, a 2-for-3 day. She's got a 2-run bomb.
That put the ball game away, 5-0 Virginia Tech on top. No shot for Elon the rest of the way.
Bree Pack, a stand-up RBI double of her own. And boy, some home cooking for the Hokies in the 2024 home opener at TSP. And then this, Emily Leggett. She seals the deal. The Hokies win it in walk-off fashion in a run rule.
Yeah, Hokies win it 9-1, run roll fashion. And all of a sudden, Virginia Tech 6-0 in home openers under Pete DeMore.
Guys, I got to say, this Virginia Tech softball team in 2024 looks legit.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it starts with the pitching depth, too. Now, you could go all across the board, but in years past, it has been Emma Lemley and Keely Rochard. That was 2022 when the Hokies were the number 2 overall seed, hosted a super regional, fell to the Florida Gators. Last year, it was Emma Lemley and a coming-on Lindsey Grine. A solid tandem, but maybe not elite. Well, this year, you have Lemley, you have a much improved Lindsey Grine, you have Cassie Grizzard, who we're going to see Kyle touch on momentarily, a transfer from Louisville. And then you also have Emma Mazzarone, and a star-studded true freshman who's a lefty. So you have 4 legit options if you're Virginia Tech. You also return 6 key contributors in your lineup. I don't see a reason why the Hokies could not compete to go to the Women's College World Series this season.
I love it. I love it. We're going to keep it there. We're going to talk more about the pitching situation and the depth inside the circle for Virginia Tech. But right now, Kyle Marchak has us covered because this Hokies team is very well-rounded. They can pick you apart all across the diamond. Kyle?
Death, taxes, and home runs. The 3 inevitabilities of life and softball season for Virginia Tech. Now, death isn't necessarily a concern of mine right now. Taxes are taxes, but Hokies softball, I'm fully invested. It's the same power-heavy hitting approach as usual from 60-year head coach Pete DeMore's squad as they opened the season at number 23 just a couple weeks ago in the country and have climbed 2 spots since, premiering at 21st in the nation ahead of Week 3 play. And that power output has pushed them along to their 7-2-1 record so far in their long-awaited 2024 campaign. Now, ignore the tie, that's a whole other debate, but with 18 big flies already this year, their 1.8 homers per outing is good for 6th best in the country. and they opened the season with an 18-1 win over Illinois. They hit 2 home runs in that game. Then 8-1 over number 18 Auburn, 2 more homers, and then a 13-1 rout of Belmont, 2 dingers. You guys get the point? Since then, it's been mostly Power 5 competition, with their 2 defeats falling in the hands of future ACC groupmates in Cal, followed by a head-scratching 11-2 loss versus Grand Canyon University. Now, disregarding the losses, though, that power we talked about earlier has mostly come from some new faces. Freshman Michelle Chatfield has flashed power potential with a .917 slugging percentage so far, and freshman Emily Leggett joins that conversation with a 1,000-plus OPS so far, too. And that's all alongside their usual nucleus of on-base machines. Emma Ritter, Cameron Fagan, and Bree Peck, all upperclassmen with 900-plus OPSs this season on the way. Oh, and don't forget about ACC Player of the Week, Rachel Castine, who has broken out this season. The junior utility has flown deep 6 times in her 9 games of action thus far, a serious spark plug of offense as a surprise hitter on the national landscape this year. One issue, though, in that Grand Canyon loss, she sustained a broken wrist after getting hit by a pitch, and she's expected for 4 to 6 weeks of recovery. Bad news for the Hokies? Yeah. Season altering? Probably not, at least not because of the roster of members that I just listed beforehand. As for the pitching, well, that's really been the only hole in their game so far, with usual All-ACC ace Emma Lemley walking batters more than usual early on, with 18 bases on balls to her 21 punch-outs in her handful of outings so far. But you've always got sophomore Lindsey Grine and Louisville transfer Cassie Grizzard eating up quality innings to help her out. But you know what they say, talent only beats hard work when talent works hard. Lord knows they've got work that's hard come ACC play. Until then, we just get to marvel at what they do in the non-con. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Man, that guy's pretty good, isn't he?
Yeah, he's pretty good at what he does.
Handsome, too.
Well,
Pretty good.
so is Virginia Tech softball. A luxury that they have, Carter. You were mentioning it earlier. 4 really solid pitchers. That's something that the Hokies have not had the last couple of seasons, is that kind of depth inside the circle. You got Lemley, Grine, Mazzarone, and then the transfer in Grizzard, Raza. I mean, just such useful weapons to have.
I mean, Carter, you touched on it generally. Yeah. Me, I really like numbers. So let me give you guys some numbers. You mentioned Emma Mazzarone as a freshman leads the team with a sub-1 ERA, .89 in 15 2/3 innings pitched. That's crazy for somebody who just stepped on campus. Now, maybe the walk to strikeout ratio could use a little bit of work, 12 walks to 10 strikeouts, but man, what more can you ask for when you're throwing with a sub-1 ERA? Lindsey Grine has been fantastic. How about 27 strikeouts to 4 walks on the year? That's absolutely crazy. And she's pitched a team-high 20 innings. Yeah. That's tied with Emma Lemley, who's obviously been so fantastic inside the circle in her time at Virginia Tech. But maybe a less than ideal start to the year for her. She hasn't exactly been the all-ACC caliber Emma Lemley, as Kyle touched on in his report. She has a 4.2 ERA that leads the team, and she has 21 walks to 24 strikeouts. Now, 24 strikeouts is Emma Lemley numbers. 21 walks, not exactly.
You got to throw strikes. I think the Hokies will take that on both the baseball and the softball side of things for sure.
Yeah, well, one thing that Virginia Tech is losing, and we have to talk about it, is Rachel Castine. She was hit by a pitch last weekend in Tempe. Evident that she's going to miss some time here. How big of a loss is this for Virginia Tech, guys? Because she's one of the stat leaders in the ACC, let alone on the team.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she's incredible. You were talking about numbers. Rachel Castine was hitting .526 before going down. 526, 5 homers, 18 RBIs. She also, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 grand slams. Two grand slams. She had 2 grand slams. That is crazy. So solid in the middle of this Virginia Tech order. Also really good defensively. This is a tough loss for Virginia Tech. And hopefully, if you're a Hokies fan, she's not out for a long period of time. But if she is, you're going to have to find a way to replace that production, because Rachel Castine was well on her way to one of the best seasons in the ACC so far this year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, who can replace her, because this was, highest of highs winning ACC Player of the Week in the first week of the season, the lowest of lows, getting hit by a pitch and being out for, I think they said 4 to 6 weeks as the timetable. So just a really unfortunate situation. But I'm glad you mentioned who can step up. I think there are a couple names that stand out to me. You got a really good freshman duo on the infield with Michelle Chatfield and Emily Leggett. Emily Leggett, obviously, we touched on it. She hit not the walk-off, I guess, but the run-ruling base hit the other day against Elon. She started 10 of 11 games. She's got an OPS over 1,000 at 1035. 2 home runs, 5 RBIs, and then Chatfield has started all 11 games for Virginia Tech. And she's second on the team with a 1433 OPS, 4 home runs, 10 RBIs. So I do think maybe your biggest bat in the lineup is down, but that doesn't mean, as they say in Moneyball, you can't recreate it in the aggregate.
Yes. Great quote. No, I think to touch on that, that's what makes Virginia Tech so dangerous. You're returning all these girls from a year ago, but you also have 2 star-studded freshmen in your lineup that can do some damage any single given day. So the Hokies going to be a tough out in the ACC.
Yeah, I got some more numbers for you on Rachel Castine. Again, this is what the Hokies are missing due to her injury. Tied for 5th in the country with 5 home runs. The most in the nation is 6. She's also tied for the most home runs in the ACC with Taylor Ensley of NC State. Again, 5 homers on the year. 3rd in the country in RBI with 18. That's good for the most in the ACC. 7th best batting average in the ACC. Best OPS in the ACC, and the best slugging percentage in the ACC as well. And on top of it all, she was on a 5-game hitting streak before she got hit by that pitch, hurt early against Grand Canyon. But for Virginia Tech, a huge weekend coming up. It's the Georgia Invitational out in Athens. Radford and UGA, the Hokies will play twice, and then they'll get a one-off with Dartmouth. I mean, some really, really big opportunities. Guys, I'll remind you, Georgia knocked Virginia Tech out of the NCAA tournament a year ago in Athens.
And it's a top 5 team in the country.
Yeah.
So what an opportunity for Virginia Tech. If you can even just split with the Bulldogs, I think Pete DeMoore takes that. You take one down there in Athens, you get one back. That's a nice win to have on your resume. Also, it's bizarre that the Hokies and Radford are
Have to
playing
go all the way down there to play
Athens,
Georgia.
Yeah.
A Corey McMillan revenge series down in the Peach State.
I think it's an excellent test for Pete DeMoore's squad, and it's also a good test. It's a bit of a litmus test, as I would like to say, to see where are you at right now as a team, as a program. Now, I obviously would like to have Rachel Castine in the lineup, so maybe you're not getting the answer you might get if you were fully healthy. But Georgia, as you mentioned, top 5 team. They're number 3 in the country, started the season ranked number 9. They're undefeated to start the year. So if you're Tech and you split with Georgia, you gladly take that, because Georgia has the 1 loss in the L column, and it's you, Virginia Tech. Now, I do think that Virginia Tech should see more general success against the likes of Radford and Dartmouth. That's actually Dartmouth's season opener because the Ivy League opened so late. So I think Tech should have a largely successful weekend down there in the Peach State, and I do think if you were to split with Georgia, like you said, Carter, you would gladly take that.
Yeah, because likely you're probably 4-1 on the weekend.
Yeah.
And that takes you right into ACC play. So last real tune-up for Virginia Tech before conference play rolls around. If you can split with the Bulldogs, a 4-1 weekend, and arguably the best win on your resume.
Yeah, as long as there's no weather to turn a 9-5 victory into a 5-5 tie, I think Hokie softball would be very happy with that.
Although I remind you, that happened down in Auburn, Alabama, in the land that just means more.
It does.
And Athens, Georgia is also the land. Say it with me. That just means
Oh,
more.
my goodness. Isn't there a little something, too, where it conveniently likes to rain when Radford and Virginia Tech are supposed to play each other? That seems to happen in softball a little bit as well. Well, guys, softball's in action, 3 o'clock and 5:30 on Friday down in Athens. And then it's 12:30 and 5:30, so they get a little bit of a break between Game 1 and Game 2 on Saturday. And then the getaway game early, 10 a.m. on Sunday. So tune in all weekend long, Virginia Tech softball. Again, baseball's hosting Rhode Island this weekend. Softball's on the road in Athens. Great time to be a fan of the Diamond Sports, fellas. Your final thoughts?
I think it should be a good weekend for both Hokie squads on the Diamond Sports side of things. I think Virginia Tech probably, hopefully, if you're a Virginia Tech fan, a sweep over Rhode Island. On the softball side, again, if you can go 4-1, quite a weekend for the Hokies down in Athens.
Yeah, you touched on it with the potential sweep of Rhode Island. Obviously that's wishful thinking. It's hard to sweep anybody in college baseball. Hard to win 3 games in a weekend. But Rhode Island, definitely a good spot to get right for Virginia Tech, coming off back-to-back tough losses. I do think they should see a lot of success over in their home opening series at English Field. And you mentioned it, Carter. I think 4-1 or even 5-0 would be a very, very good weekend down in Athens, Georgia. But I do think there should be general success across both sports.
Gentlemen, can't thank you enough for your expertise analysis. That'll do it for this week's edition of 3304 First Pitch. For everyone in the studio that makes all the magic happen, for our reporters, Wesley, Clarke, and Kyle Marchak, for Raza Umerani, for Carter Hill, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long from the Moss Art Center in Blacksburg, and we'll see you next week.